So hi everyone, and welcome to our virtual field day and Q&A, rotational grazing and cover crop integration. My name is Julia Zato, and I'm the engagement manager with FarmFolk CityFolk. And we also have David Katzel on the call, who's our BC Seed Security Program Manager here at FarmFolk. It's great to see so many people on this call, and thank you so much for joining us and spending the evening with us. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining this call from the Coquitlam First Nation, which lies within the shared territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Katzie, Musqueam, Kaikite, Squamish, and Stolo nations. So our schedule for this evening is broken into 3 parts. After some short introductions, we will be watching a video that we filmed at Whiskey Creek Ranch at the end of August. And after that video, we'll hear an update from Michelle and a program presentation, followed by the Q&A. Great. So before we jump into our program, I think David is going to launch a quick poll for everyone to take. It's only 3 quick questions, and we appreciate the feedback. So you should see that pop up on your screen with the option to select answers from multiple choice questions. So I'll give everyone a moment to do that.
Okay, looks good. I think people on their phones are not going to be able to participate in the poll, so I don't know if you can see the results. But there's a lot of farmers on the call. About 73% of us are farmers, which is really great. There's some farm support and engaged citizens. We're joining from multiple areas, including the Skeena, Vancouver Island, the Kootenays, the Okanagan, 27% from the Peace region and the South Coast. And the beneficial management practices people use are pretty all across the board as well. Half of you are into rotational grazing, cover cropping, reduced tillage, multi-species integration, and less of you are into manure management. So I guess that's an area where we can improve a little. Okay. All right. So as we get started here, thanks for responding. So this event is a collaborative effort between FarmFolk CityFolk and the Small Scale Meat Producers Association. If you're not familiar with FarmFolk CityFolk already, we are BC's oldest and largest food and agriculture charitable nonprofit organization established in 1993. Our programs seek to connect, empower, and inspire people to strengthen BC's sustainable food systems. Julia will jump in a minute to talk about the Small Scale Meat Producers Association. Our cover cropping events are part of the Climate Solutions program that we run, which is a response to the massive potential that agricultural lands have to mitigate climate change through a variety of practices. Our programming aims to engage with various levels of government to implement climate-friendly policies, to work with farmers across BC to identify effective climate change mitigation strategies, and to empower British Columbians to make climate-friendly food choices. So I also want to acknowledge that this event is supported by the BC Climate Agri-Solutions Fund. Funding for the BC Climate Agri-Solutions Fund has been provided by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada through the Agricultural Climate Solutions On-Farm Climate Action Fund. Today we're joined by Julia Smith, Michelle Schaefer, and Nadia Mori. I'll let them speak in a minute, but Julia is a grazing mentor with the Farmers for Climate Solutions Farm Resilience Mentorship Program. She's been raising a wide range of livestock, including cattle, sheep, poultry, and pigs over the past 12 years. She's a founding member and past president of the Small Scale Meat Producers Association, where she now serves as the executive director. Michelle Schaefer from Whiskey Creek Farm is a farmer, a natural resource environmental specialist, a professional agrologist, and a certified grazing mentor. She's also a director of the Peace River Forage Association of BC and the executive for the Small Scale Meat Producers Association. And Nadia Mori is the extension coordinator who joins us from the Peace Region Living Labs. She has been a forage extension specialist for 10 years. She's also a farmer and produces microgreens and fresh vegetables. I am going to pass it off now to Julia Smith to speak about the work that the small scale meat producers does.
Thank you, David. And I'm going to share my screen so you don't have to look at me. I just have a couple slides so I don't forget anything. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. It's exciting to get together in the off season and remember all the fun stuff we did over the summer. I had a really good time up in the Peace with Nadia and Michelle last year, doing our grazing programming up there. So I just wanted to say a little bit about SSMPA in case you're not familiar with our association. We've been around since about 2018. We represent British Columbian farmers and ranchers who are raising meat outside of the conventional industrial system. So people that aren't necessarily represented by, BC Chicken or BC Cattlemen's Association. We're a registered nonprofit made up of primary producers as well as supportive individuals and organizations. And our goal is to just build greater stability and growth opportunities for small scale meat producers in BC. We came together because we were all really similarly frustrated with the challenges that we were facing trying to grow our businesses. We have really strong leadership. We're going to go through the whole list, but I just want to show you that we have leadership from all over the province, which is one of the really cool things about our organization. So from the Peace to down here to east to west, it's a really diverse mix of ages and experiences as well. So I think our leadership is one of our greatest strengths. And we represent farmers and ranchers, but we also recently added meat processors to our membership options. So they can now join as non-voting members. We're still farmer-led. But we realized pretty quickly that our futures are intrinsically linked, and we were doing a lot of work with the processing industry. And so we thought we'd make our relationship, official. And then I just wanted to share this one pretty picture here. We did a really great survey in 2021 to get a handle on what the industry looks like. And here's just a kind of snapshot of it. We had great response, 708 respondents from all over the province. And not surprisingly, we discovered that the top 3 challenges facing small scale meat producers are access to slaughter, access to cut and wrap, and profitability. A few other interesting numbers on here are that 94% are supplementing their income with other work not related to their meat business. And I think that's a lot of that is tied into the fact that we haven't been able to scale our businesses because of these challenges. Top land-based practices, you can see a lot of people are already doing a lot of these BMPs before it was cool, before there was funding available for it. So that was nice to see. And we've made some good progress on some of these challenges, even since the survey was completed. We've managed to be instrumental in getting some new meat processing regulations brought in to increase access to on-farm slaughter all across the province. We've managed to get that insured, which was a really big challenge. So it's a really great organization. I really encourage you to join us if you are a meat producer or if you are meat producer curious or a meat consumer. It's important that we have the membership numbers behind us when we're in conversations with decision makers. So please come and join us. You can learn more about us at our website, smallscalemeat.ca, or find us on socials. So thanks for the opportunity, you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Julia. Okay, so just a few housekeeping things. The video is just over 16 minutes long. We'll watch it in one go, so I encourage you to write down questions as they come up for you, and then wait until our Q&A period to ask them. We have quite a bit of time for Q&A, so you'll have the opportunity to raise questions then. The video will be shared by David, so I will spotlight and pin his video. We use a program to share our videos, so it won't automatically go into speaker view. You have to manually use the view options on the top right-hand corner and select speaker view. Please keep your audio turned off, especially during the video, so everyone can hear the audio clearly. Does anybody have any questions before we begin? Okay, awesome. Then I will pass it on to David. we will share the video.
Okay, great. And just, I did pop the YouTube video in the chat just in case anybody has real trouble hearing it. Feel free to just quickly pop out and watch it on your own.
I'm Michelle Schaefer, and this is my husband Gaston, and since 2015 we have had a regenerative mixed livestock farm here north of Fort St. John, where we produce grass-fed beef, pasture-raised pork, broilers, and turkeys, laying hens in a regenerative way. We also have a value-add line for our honey and some agri-foods as well.
This whole thing started with pork. I mean, obviously we had the gateway drug, which was chickens, a few eggs, right? And then Shell couldn't eat store-bought pork, so thought, well, we'd try pork. And then one thing led to another. And so that kind of started our journey in on it. And then just through not having a preconceived notion of how to farm.
Because we're first-generation farmers.
We're first-generation farmers, we did a lot of reading, and we kind of subscribed to that method of regenerative agriculture and being able to stack enterprises on a small amount of land, usable land. And then we found ways that obviously with pigs we can also use the parts that are not as desirable, like the forested areas and things like that, where they actually thrive in. So that, I think, plays a lot into it too. We decided to use our land and not let our land dictate what we have to have or how we can use it.
And also listening to what the land is telling us and just acting more as a steward really spoke to us. We both have a background in environments and soils and vegetation management from a professional perspective, and that kind of just dovetailed perfectly into what we were already doing in our professional lives. So it made sense to us to learn more about it and what we were applying on the farm. With a limited land base, so yes, our farm is 160 acres. Less than half of that is actually usable for livestock. With livestock on it, not just management, because we have a large wetland complex that runs through most of our property. So we are limited. Traditionally or conventionally, you might be just a cattle farmer, and they would take up the entire land. Whereas with rotational grazing, we're able to stack our enterprises. So we're able to start with the cattle, for example, move the pigs in behind them, or the poultry in behind them, and kind of use the same land more than once, with each of those animals providing different benefits to improving soil health.
By rotationally grazing, we can also put more animals per acre by managing it that way intensively than we could just running it conventionally. Maybe the numbers aren't going to be factual, but maybe instead of running 10 cows on the 60 acres, we can run 25. And then we can still stack pigs, chickens, and broilers on top of that. Aside from the benefits of what it's doing for the soil, it's also allowing us to have a bigger enterprise than what convention says.
Cover cropping is new to us, so we have taken that project on to see how that can add to improving our soil health. And it's a mixed cover crop, not too many species for our first year, but it is something to start out with. And we're also looking at that to see how we can improve our soil health. Can we decrease some of our costs for our feed costs for some, for the animals, the livestock that we put through thereafter? And we're looking at that also from a perspective, can we produce any value-added goods out of our cover crop too to help our bottom line on the farm. Our cover crop project is quite small in terms of scale. It's 2 acres, but it's part of a larger annual perennial vegetable garden expansion area. It's within an old pasture area, so we are dealing with some of that perennial forage vegetation. This year, we knocked back that vegetation and we planted a mixture of an annual clover, so crimson clover, oats, peas, and a tillage radish. Each one has, a multitude of benefits, but some of them are nitrogen fixing. Some of them will be for forage. Some of them are just to provide biodiversity, for the bees that we have on the property. And eventually the long game is that we will still cover crop in the area, but we will intersperse it with annual and perennial market garden expansion for the community.
And the idea is also to continue using livestock to manage the rows that are not in the market garden rows, production rows. It's to use the pigs or the chickens or both, running them through the areas that we have cover crops so that they continue forage and continue working the soil and essentially improving our ground. So keeping things at bay.
Yep, absolutely. So with our cover crop, it's our first year planting it, and with the long-term vision of moving it into an annual perennial market garden space. This year, simply leaving it for us to move livestock into means it's going to look different from future years down the road. But this year, so pigs actually move into the area next week, and they're the first ones who will be moved through it systematically in smaller paddock sizes within that 2 acres. And then afterwards, we'll put the cows in there, or the chickens, really both can go in there, because there'll be multiple paddocks open at a time. And that will be a little bit weather dependent, how much the poultry will be able to use it, because once we hit our cold season, they've got to head into more, dependable housing for their needs. Next year, we will start to put in our more permanent bed locations. So that will be, planning for whatever annual or perennial crops will go in there, with enough spacing for us to run the cover cropping down and in between those more permanent beds. And so then again, those cover crops will go in, and then later in the season, we'll be running the livestock through it again, likely those hogs first, and then, the poultry within the chicken tractor, or the cattle down it as well.
And then also with having the animals moving through, yes, pigs are going to move through. It's going to be very structured in how we move them, along with the chickens and the beef right away. But I think as the snow starts to come, we'll probably open the entire area, and we'll let the cows just go in, and they will paw if there's still some residual oats or anything that is desirable. They'll still paw and work through it, and still continue pushing some of that stuff into the ground, creating an organic layer.
The Peace Region Living Labs is such a cool project. So with it being over 5 years, we have the support from academia, who are allowing us as farmers to lead the project that is unique to our farm, but they're providing us with some of the data collection and those measurable variables and the qualitative data, so we can actually not just anecdotally think what we see happening out there, but we can actually look at it and say it's a tangible result. We can actually say this is what's happening, and seek those reasons why, and play with that for future years. And it's giving insight into the broader picture about how regenerative agriculture can support resilience on a farm in light of climate change as well, with some of these best management practices, cover cropping only being one.
We grow, not necessarily in numbers, but we grow every year as farmers. Things get easier. We learn things that work that don't work. But, winter time is actually a pretty relaxing time, because we're bale grazing and feeding. And feeding is not every day. It's usually every couple of weeks. We go out and we'll put a load of hay out and set our bale graze up for that 2 weeks. And that just helps us control our hay number, so that we're not just frivolously putting it out. But, so wintertime is really kind of our easy time. It's our relaxing time. And then as we get into the spring,
I'll just add to, we don't have any birds on pasture. We're under 3 to 5 feet of snow, minus 40. So in terms of number of animals that are on the property, we just have cattle and hogs and the laying hens, right? There's no broilers or turkeys or bees.
And as we move into the spring, obviously it becomes, the season of either farrowing pigs, or usually we farrow pigs a little bit earlier than the cows calve. So we basically go from farrowing pigs for 3 to 6 weeks. Then we move into usually maybe a week or two break. And then we move into calving the cows. And that's usually a 6 to 8 week situation, which usually brings us into June, and then we start looking at what we're going to do for broilers, or have broilers already at that point, or turkeys already that we're going to be looking to put out at pasture, increasing our numbers, or replacing our laying hens, so still breeding for that. And then basically then it's maintenance and feeding throughout the summer, and managing pasture, and moving cattle, and moving pigs, and so watering and things like that, and along with all the other projects that come along with summertime conditions, whether that's fencing or that's improvements around the farm for whatever that may be.
Life.
It's dugouts, or it's whatever, right? It's those activities that need to be done through the summer. So, and then there's, recently we're trying our hand at haying, so that throws a monkey wrench into things as well. And so, summertime really is our Like I would say March to October is basically our really busy season. That's, when the Michelle's hitting markets and we're really pushing products out the door at that point. Of course, it's forage season, so that's when we're getting all the veggies, and that's when we're working in the kitchen mostly, where Michelle's really pushing in the kitchen to value add things, right? So that becomes a really busy season through the summer.
Our climate this year has certainly been different, and it has been over a number of years. During the heat wave or the heat dome 2021, I mean, we experienced a tornado here on the farm, which is not normal for this area, and we had significant livestock damage. Rotational grazing wouldn't have necessarily helped us with the tornado itself, but rotational grazing, the benefits of that was certainly visible in the challenges that we noticed with our animals managing their heat stress. So we were able to move them into silver pasture areas where we have no fencing, that we could use our, more temporary and responsive fencing with the hot fencing. We can move them into these areas, keep them cooler in the middle of the day when the, heat stress was extreme. It's something that we continuously talk about where, those hottest part of the days, we still had animals out grazing. They weren't just seeking shade. They were still, going about their normal daily activities because they were in those cooler, long grasses that we were able to manage for.
Well, and I think a lot of that also fell on the bale grazing areas. So the idea behind the bale grazing is obviously to add nutrients in the ground, but it's also moisture holding. So where we had the bale grazing areas, it was still pretty amazing to see 2-foot tall grass, green as can be, when the stuff that wasn't armored with the area that was bale grazed was looking a little bit not so good, dead, essentially. I mean,
especially
it was
during
crunchy, it was hard, it wasn't nice forage, but we had those areas, cooler ground, cows were on it, they'd even lay in the middle of the day in the broad sunlight, 40 above, and they'd be sitting there chewing their cud. They'd lay down, and so I mean, I think that although we, at those points, we didn't necessarily have cover cropping, I think the rotational grazing and the management that we were putting in place, that was how that overcame that one specific example. Was a prime example, was in the heat dome. With cover cropping, I think that just farther supports healthy soil, having armor on the soil, protecting the soil. I mean, we see out there, there's no way the sun can go down and burn the soil at this point. It's protected. And as the animals run through there and knock that stuff down and tramp it into the ground, again, it's another layer of moisture holding. It's another layer of protection. It protects
Organics.
Against water erosion, likely even wind erosion. I mean, luckily we don't have a lot of heavy wind here, but, and then yes, it continues to support the soil growth portion, having the organics laid down.
And we've noticed some, outside of the heat dome itself, we have some really tired pasture around here. It was land that was neglected and just through unuse long before we bought the farm. And these areas where, we've implemented things like the bale grazing or the hogs or the poultry, or even just stacking enterprises that complement each other with the beef in there. We've seen a resurgence of, that moisture holding capacity, an increase in vegetation composition, which has the species, which has added to the biodiversity for the whole farm. Some of our clover in our tame areas has really come back in really wonderful ways, which is really supporting our honey production out here. And the hogs love clover, so it's just not this singular domino effect. It actually has this cascading effect to all of the enterprises that we've had on the farm. And that builds resiliency into our operation. Let's say that, one of our enterprises is not doing great, but one of our enterprises could be doing more wonderful because of these cascading effects. And, we can tinker and marionette with any of those things, but really we sit back, sometimes day to day, week to week for sure, and we say, this is behaving differently than we thought, and we can, pivot and make changes where we can utilize that, or we have to pull animals off because it's, not responding the way we thought it would. And we've really noticed that we are just facilitators out here. We are stewards, and we really listen to what the land is telling us. Our grazing plans typically get adjusted even though we try to lay them out as best as possible at the beginning of the year. I mean, sometimes you just have to try. Like, it's never going to be 100% perfect. You're never going to be able to anticipate what could happen or what might happen. And sometimes you just have to get started, even if, even if you don't have everything in place. So jumping both feet in. And yeah, it can be scary, but sometimes that's where the magic happens, is outside of your comfort zone. And it can be stressful, don't get me wrong. And there's more people out there who are thinking the same way you are than maybe you think, and find your community that can help support you. And whether that's not a farmer that you meet until 10 years down the road, or it's your neighbor. We live in this age of, where we can connect with people who aren't near us, and sometimes those are your best resources. And get off the farm. Otherwise, you'll be here all the time working. And we are not perfect by any means, but make intentional time to get off the farm and take a break.
Don't find a reason to stay, find a reason to leave. That one is probably the most important, because no matter how much you say you may love it, it is important to have that time away. And when you get away, especially if you can have proper support systems, and actually farming this way, if you do it properly, it actually can allow you to leave.
Yeah.
Especially in the winter for us. I mean, we can comfortably leave for a week in the winter because we know we have enough feed out, and we know what it takes to put the cows out, and we've put things in that maybe are a little more expensive, but like electric heated waterers, where we don't have to worry about, is the water thawed, is the water frozen, is it
generally,
it's generally a pretty seamless, fail-proof thing, right?
Yeah.
And we
build your system so you can get off the farm.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thanks everyone for watching. Before we get into the Q&A, we're going to hear an update from Michelle to hear about how the rest of her season went. So I will hand it over to you, Michelle.
Set this up here. Everyone see that all right? Okay, great stuff. So this is my little family. I like to put them up there. So I just wanted to give a really quick update. You might be curious about some of the challenges. Oh, sorry about that. Some of the challenges or successes that we had with putting in that cover crop. And I thought I would just talk a little bit about it. This tractor is not ours, and that's going to lead us right into the tractor, and the power harrow are not ours, and that's going to lead us right into talking about some of the successes that we saw with the project. We don't have this equipment. We are really low key, high speed, low drag is what my husband calls us. So we had to source a tractor. We had to source, the power harrow that we ended up using, even the broadcast seeder that we ended up using. We were really lucky that we were able to talk with friends and people that we know, and horse trade for the use of the equipment that we needed to put in the cover crop. So we consider that a huge success. We were also able to have the seed donated, and that was through our involvement with the Peace Region Living Lab. But we also added some extra species to the mix, and we were able to get that through friends who were grain farmers. So you can see my husband there just taking it literally right out of the truck when we were up getting feed one day. Information sharing, we consider a huge success. We didn't feel as blind going into this project. It really helped us see around corners that we didn't know existed. We had attended a lot of other webinars. We had spoken with people who had trialed cover crops in southern BC. Through the Living Lab, we were able to speak with a cover crop specialist and really nail down some of our timing with our seeding schedule. We were able to talk to other local professionals and just read fact sheets and such through other, professional organizations in our area and around the province. We were also able to share our learnings through in-person workshops and events as well. And that's been a huge success, because it's great to be able to stand on the shoulder of other people. And we felt that we've been able to, so we're always happy to share, kind of what has happened for us. Some of the really exciting, sexy numbers are that we were virtually able to eliminate the cost of supplemented feed for 5 hogs for 65 days. other than a few jailbreaks where, you know, we had to get animals back to where they needed to be, and we used, you know, a bucket of grain to help us do that, we were able basically to leave them on the cover crop and yeah, not add grain to their daily ration. We were able to access soil testing through the Living Lab. Just some of the highlights there regarding, you know, soil organic matter and soil organic carbon, which are really exciting numbers. We have a few more years of testing available in front of us. 2 more, I think, maybe 3 more. And so it'll be really great to see how those numbers trend as we continue to put cover crops in the area and, you know, diversify how that cover crop area looks. It also helped with compaction. So if you're not familiar with Peace region soils, clay and heavy clay, surface soil and subsoil are typically the norm up here unless you're kind of north of Dawson. So we have that to deal with. And we were able to produce 2 products out of our cover crop. And we thought that was a win also because it has the potential to diversify our income. But it also, a lot of people look at cover crops as, you know, a year or a season where there's been a total loss of productive capacity. So we were able, you know, to prove that there maybe is a potential there for that to be minimized. Challenges. Yeah, all these cattle and poultry and hogs running beside a cover crop that looks amazing. They definitely broke out of jail and into the cover crop. You can see our dairy cows there. Just our 2 family milk cows. They were in the cover crop. Watching the video reminded me how truly challenging of a season we had in terms of weather, with forest fires and hot, dry periods, and, you know, rain coming, but really interspersed with those long dry periods and, you know, intense rainfall. When we did get rain, we had, you know, a major health crisis in our family, and, you know, that was a very challenging part of our year, and it became the pivot point for everything that we did. So, you know, the cover crop was affected that way in terms of, you know, when we could get out there, who could do the work. Given that it was in a perennial pasture area, we are dealing with some regrowth competition, and in specifically wild roses is our problem. Alfalfa doesn't seem too bad, but we are going to have this lingering wild rose, you know, challenge that we're going to have to deal with there. So there's no challenge with there being access to soil testing through the Living Lab, but what it is telling us is that we're going to have to watch, you know, our pH. So our pH is moving in the wrong direction. Our water infiltration ability has decreased. These are just some of the preliminary lab results that are coming back. So it'll be really interesting to see how we can mitigate some of those effects. We have compaction issues because of our clay soils. You can see the tillage radish there. It hit the plow pan and then just went crazy trying to send out its roots, you know, and deal with that. That wasn't the standard. There are definitely ones that did break through the plow pan, but we did see a lot of this, you know, very lateral effect from the root systems. And something that we didn't anticipate, but that we really noticed, where that we had a predator problem that increased, and specifically that was the fox and the coyote that would use the cover crop to get close to our pasture poultry operation. And it actually forced us to bring them off pasture probably about 3 weeks sooner than we would have liked, just because we had significant pressure and we couldn't handle it anymore. And then we noticed that we had a lot of root maggot in our tillage radish. So that'll be really interesting to see as we move into more, you know, crop production from a market garden perspective, if that persists, or, you know, what can be done to mitigate that. We get asked all the time if we would do it again, and yeah, absolutely, 100%. We're already planning on other spots on the property where we can do this to help, you know, improve our soils in those locations. These are all pictures from the cover crop this year, and including one of the products that we made there. Yeah, in the top. That's all.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so I'm going to now pass it to Nadia, who's going to share some information about the Peace Region Living Labs.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try and be speedy here. My name's Nadia Mori. I'm the Extension Coordinator for the Peace Region Living Lab, and I'm just going to give a little bit of a kind of high-level overview of the Peace Region Living Lab and how Michelle's project fits into that. So it's a larger initiative by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada as part of their Agriculture Climate Solutions program, and the Living Labs program is underneath that larger initiative. If you're from the south of BC, you might be familiar or maybe even involved with the BC Living Lab. And so you can see you would be number 1 on the map, and then the Peace Region is number 2 on the map out of 14 different living labs. And 10 of those got started 2 years ago. So we just finished our second season here and have another 3 to go for the 5-year project. It is really amazing that our project got approved because we're the only one that's interprovincial, and our project is watershed based rather than province based, which just really makes a lot of sense. The Alberta and Peace Region are a lot more similar to each other than, say, the BC Peace Region to the Lower Mainland or even some of the southern parts. So we were really excited that that was recognized and acted upon. We're a partnership of 8 groups. On the Alberta side, they're applied research associations, and on the BC side, we just call them producer groups. And so Michelle is involved through the Peace River Forage Association, which I'm also the coordinator of when I'm wearing a different hat. And we were really fortunate to build on all this existing foundation that each of those groups had with the producer community in their respective areas. So here's an overview of the 57 sites that are part of the Peace Region Living Lab. You can see they're kind of peppered all the way through the Alberta and BC Peace. And then Michelle's site would be E1, if you can see it on the BC side. So that's where she fits in. And we're just so grateful to work with those producers. They have to allow us to go onto their fields and take all the measurements. And then as part of the project, we're focusing on beneficial management practices that each of these innovative producers are working on and implementing. And the project is following along to see what is happening, and we can hopefully move beyond what they anecdotally observe and see what science is behind it and what is actually happening in the soil and how can we quantify that. So we actually have a 13 total beneficial management practices that we monitor, which is very ambitious. And so underneath each of those BMPs, we have multiple producers participating, and they range anywhere from lots of perennial forage production, focused BMPs, to annual crop, livestock integration. We're also trying to bridge the piece between annual and livestock producers to have some integration. And then we also have some horticultural producers, and Michelle kind of also bridges between livestock and horticultural production. And so her BMP that we're looking at is under the cover cropping, even though there's also some livestock integration and also the market garden piece. So there's a lot going on, but we put her under the cover cropping for the purpose of the Peace Region Living Lab. And there's the lovely picture of the pigs having a good time in the cover crop. So this is just an overview of her site. So all the green dots at the bottom are her treatment area. So in the video, you could see the cover cropping area. So that's where that is. And then where the white dots are, that's the control areas where the pasture is still the pasture that Michelle was talking about. That's maybe a little bit tired and serves as a good control to compare to the cover crop area. And so at all of those points, so there's 9 control points, 9 treatment points. So if you only look at the white and the green dots, the blue dots were where soil samples were taken for the carbon reference. So this was one of the first measurements we did in year 1, and then we'll do again in year 5, is a 1 meter soil core to observe what the soil carbon is doing, which is a core interest in the project from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's perspective, to see if we can get greenhouse gas emission reduction and also increased carbon sequestration. So for the greenhouse gas emission, at Michelle's site, we would only be doing the nutrient budgeting because we're a little bit too far away to do the active GasMet data collection, which involves a lot of hands-on from the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada scientists. And then we might also try out a model called HOLOS on some of the sites where that makes sense. And then these are all the measurements that we would have taken at Michelle's sites and are going to continue taking at that site at all of those points and every year. And so Michelle was making reference to some water infiltration observations. We're also looking at soil compaction, the temperature, which would indicate how hot the soil gets, depending on how much cover there is. We're also taking yield samples, composition samples. So what is the species composition, especially on pastures, and looking at other kind of associated benefits, soil health factors like the soil color, how much moisture is down there, what does it smell like, what does it feel like, how is aggregation going, that sort of thing. And also looking at insects, both in terms of disease causing insects and beneficial insects. And we did have a little workshop with Keith Uloth, who's our insect person in the Peace region, and he had a little workshop here at Michelle's operation. So that was really helpful. And that's all I had. If there's any questions, I'm really happy to answer them. We do have a website where we have lots of videos and soon, hopefully, also project reports coming out. And if you're interested in our events, please go there and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll always be in the loop. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nadia. Okay, great. So now we're going to move to the Q&A portion of the evening. And I just want to note that we want this to be as interactive as possible. So we're going to prioritize questions from people who raise their hands on the call and ask questions that way. That being said, please feel free to type in questions in the chat and we'll get to as many of those as we can. And I'll open up the floor to you to ask those questions and to get started. And I'm going to pass this on my side over to David, who's going to lead this portion of the night. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, we have a question. Julia.
Just thought I'd kick it off because nobody wants to go first. Michelle, I was wondering if you could talk about how you made your decisions about your rotations in terms of which livestock would go through the cover crop and when.
Sure. We definitely, so we looked at it from the species composition, what we had in the cover crop. So we actually had 2 kinds of peas, oats, crimson clover, a tillage radish and a tillage radish. So just 5 species, very, very simple. Partially, you know, those species specifically already made up the hog feed that we already use. So we thought it was naturally, you know, we'd put the hogs through first and see what they did. We actually referred to this batch of hogs as broken pigs because they went in and mowed everything down. And it was weeks before they actually would start to, you know, use their snouts on the land and really, you know, do what you're used to pigs doing, sorry. So yeah, they would go in and they would systematically just eat all of the oats and all of the peas off all the tops of the plants. And then they would trample everything down and get to the crimson clover. And then it would take them a couple of days and then they would really start to work the soil and get to the tillage radish. So once we noticed they were doing that, it kind of validated for us that it was probably a really good idea to continue with the pigs, and we would put them. And so it took them about 7 days per size of paddock is what we aimed for them. And
were you able to recoup some feed savings?
Yeah. So we didn't feed those hogs for 65 days additionally. We just left them in the cover crop. So 5,
Nice.
market hogs that finished out, but I think their averages were between 270 and 295. So yeah, 65 days of no additional feed. So we looked at that as a win, not just because the seed had been donated to us for, our involvement in the living lab, but had we invested in the cover crop seed and not have had to feed them for 65 days, it would have at least, we anticipate it being a wash. And we saw value in that as well. So
Cool. That's good to
Mhm.
hear. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I think Amber was next. You've got your hand up. Feel free to unmute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I had sort of the same question as Julia, but I guess I'm curious too. So you put your pigs in first and they did their thing and then you followed them up with the cattle, is that right?
we did let the cattle in eventually. And our intention was actually to put our poultry system behind it. But again, we had too much pressure from fox and coyotes. So we had to, change our plans there. So the cows did go in the fall. We just opened it right up after the hogs were gone, and the cows went in and cleaned up, whatever they could find. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Great, we have another question from Natalie.
Hi there. Question was, Michelle, do you have any theories about why your pH is going in the wrong direction? What do you think?
I have no theories. Typically, we've been using bale grazing as a way to, buffer our pH challenges. But given that we don't want any seeds from hay to take root in this area anymore, we won't be using that as an option. So I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't know if Nadia has any thoughts on that. But yeah, I don't know. Not yet.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Nadia, did you have was there any thoughts on why that might be?
No, but I think we want to do a bit more soil sampling to make sure we have the right measurements of the pH. There was some thought that maybe there was a little bit of, mixing in because some of the soil carbon samples were taken a little bit in a different location, but we will definitely monitor it and see what we can do.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions? Feel free to use the chat if you like, but if you're open to raising your hand, that would be good too. Or just speak up. We do have a few questions in the that people put in as they registered beforehand. Oh, but we'll take a question from you, Kristen.
Thanks. Michelle, just wondering what you mean by bale grazing, if it's some special thing or you just mean putting bales out? I haven't heard the term before.
Sure. Yeah, so we put out a number of bales in a specific area where we would like the cattle to graze, and they're not in bale feeders. They are just, unwrapped twine or whatever it is that those bales happen to be wrapped with. And we allow the cattle to free choice feed basically off of them. And it concentrates their manure and urine load in certain areas. I don't think we've fed, we haven't, every 2 weeks, maybe we turn on a tractor to put out bales. It helps, add some, buffering through, sometimes it's referred to as waste, but the waste material that they don't get down and eat. It adds, organic matter to your soil. I think it can help buffer pH from my understanding. Sorry, my video's a little crazy there. And yeah, it's a winter feeding method that we use for our cattle for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Great. Amber, you had a follow-up question?
I'm sorry if I missed this, but I'm curious about sort of what was involved in getting your cover crop from seed to that beautiful, what we saw in the video in terms of sort of your time and your management and watering and were you getting birds in there trying to sabotage everything? Like, what did that look like?
Sure. So we power harrowed it with the big tractor and the power harrow in early May, which is basically our season up here where we're actually able to get into fields and do seeding anyways. And then we watched the weather to see when we could time our seeding with an actual rainfall event. And we didn't actually end up seeding until closer or at the beginning of June. So there was like 3.5 weeks. One of the challenges that we noticed was that some of our perennial vegetation had started to come back at that point. But we broadcast seeded, just a broadcast seeder on the back of our side-by-side. And then we chain harrowed it. And that actually helped to kick back some of that perennial vegetation that had started, to find its way back into growth. And then, it's a Hail Mary at that point. We do not irrigate up here. So everything was at the mercy of the weather. And yeah, so we left it. And that, I think we pulled the hogs out of there at the end of, or in the middle of October. So we didn't turn them in till the beginning, close to, the end of August, I guess it would have been. 65 days from there.
Awesome. Great. Eden, you have your hand up?
There we go. I guess my question is your plan for, because you said you were going to cover crop again, is it going to be in that same area, or are you rotating where you are putting in a cover crop? Is it going to go back into pasture, or is it just going to be planted again as a feed? It seems like you use your cover crop as a feed. So are you doing it in the same area, or is it kind of like going to move around so that what you're growing is kind of like benefiting the soil, or like I don't know what the plan is there.
Sure. So it's part of an overall expansion of into market gardening. So we will strip till certain areas this year, which we will put into production, perennial or annual vegetables. And whatever we don't strip till, we will put back into cover crop. But also, and yes, we do plan to put cover crops in the farm in other locations because we have liked what we've seen, and we have some tired pasture areas, and we have some areas that could really use some improvement, and we'd like to try cover cropping on them. But, so yes to all of the questions that you kind of alluded to there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Dieter, you have a question? You have to just unmute yourself first.
That helps, right?
Perfect.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Michelle. This is a great project. I have two questions. Are you planning on seeding the same cover crop mix this year? Or do you have, say, well, maybe you want to get one species more or different species? And the second question is, do you have an idea why you experience compaction? Do you know the origin of the compaction? Is that from cattle or equipment or?
So yes, we will still use the species that we've used in this project, but we do plan to add to it. We would like to add some more species that would help with the pollinators, given that we produce honey. It's always nice to add, even if it's sunflowers, Phacelia we've looked at a little bit. There's some other things that we're thinking about adding as well. So I think we will always keep this kind of base trial mix. I think we'll add some turnips to see, what that will help. And that the turnip specifically and the tillage radish, those specifically relate to the compaction challenges that we have here. We just have really heavy clay soils where our farm is. And so that, you know, we have to really watch when we get into the field with, you know, especially that big tractor. It's got to be dry enough, and otherwise we're just going to exacerbate some of that compaction issues. But that is just inherently a challenge that we have up here.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Eric, you have your hand up?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
We can.
Good. I noticed that picture of the village radish with all the roots going sideways. So it's a little hard to take. Village radish will grow above the ground too, but I'm going to say some 5 inches below ground. And the last fellow just asked the game right question. So I'm being support. Now that you've realized you have compaction make the village radish grow sideways like that, I'm assuming you've had some discussions on what you could do to mitigate some of that compaction. So in past discussions, we've worried a bit about sodium collecting on top of the clay hard sand layer, BMP or right. So, but in your discussions, trying to stop that village rather than growing sideways like that, what kind of plan would you have to address some of that compaction?
So it was a little hard to hear you, Eric, but it looks like Michelle was nodding like you heard what he said. So
I
if you
think so.
just kind of, maybe if we can just clarify the question, if you're okay, just repeating
So,
what was asked. Yeah.
sure. Eric, are you wondering what we might be looking at to in addition to the tillage radish that might help us with our compaction issues?
Yes, village radish in some form can open up those spaces. But what would be your plan to address the compaction?
Okay. So we're going to till as little as possible is one of our plans, so that we can avoid, you know, reducing that pore space in our soils. But we are, yeah, so, and we're also looking at what is the efficacy of maybe us using a subsoiler in the area. And that's, again, that's access to specialized equipment that we don't have yet. But we do know, you know, some in the area that we might be able to get our hands on to use. So those are really, we're trying to do it through vegetation with the tillage radish, and hopefully some turnips and even the hogs are helpful that way. But the subsoiler is really the only mechanized piece that we've considered at this point. Does that get what, does that answer your question, Eric?
Yes, we're all thinking the same direction. What kind of choices do we have? I know we've got that stuff in our farm.
I'm curious. I have a bit of a follow-up question on that. Have you looked into the seed drill, like a sort of no-till seeders, and is that something you'd be able to use on your property?
Yeah, there is a no-till seed drill up here that we can access through the Forage Association, and we did actually consider that as part of, you know, should we seed this specific project with that, and it came down to timing and the fact that we had a broadcast seeder available to us, you know, the next day. So, and we had a little, yeah. And so we overseeded a little bit and went with the broadcast seeder, but we have considered using that no-till seed drill for sure. Yeah.
Have other questions? And if you can't find the hand up button, feel free to just unmute and shout it out.
Michelle, what advice would you have for people that are curious about getting started with some of these practices, but maybe a little bit overwhelmed and don't know where to start?
Gosh, being overwhelmed is like the flavor of the day with, you know, all these choices in front of you. Just try. You're not going to have it figured out 100%. And, you know, by just trying, you're going to have a perspective that you didn't have before you got started. That's going to help inform, and that asking questions, you know, there's so many people you can ask questions to. It doesn't have to be your neighbor. It can be, you know, local forage associations or whatever whatever the crop is that you're wanting to seed. There's people out here who can help you, and just start searching for those people and just try, because we have lots of failures even though we've tried. Yeah, it's not going to be perfect. It's okay to fail. That's when you learn.
We also connected Michelle to an agrologist that kind of specializes in this type of work and cover crops specifically. So that might be an avenue too, if you're just not sure where to get started, to talk to somebody.
Yeah, and we wouldn't have known that particular person existed if we, didn't have access to with the living lab. So that was really helpful.
Thanks. That's great advice. It's always good to learn to embrace the opportunity to fail because you learn a whole lot when you do. Dieter, you have your hand up.
Yeah, came in that discussion with this cover crop specialist. Did he also think chicory would be a good idea? I know that in some parts chicory is used also to combat compaction, and I haven't really. That might be something if you're trying things anyways. Maybe look into that mix too, right?
Yeah,
Let's
for
see.
sure.
Ask the specialist what he thinks about that. It's perhaps difficult to find seeds, but I know somebody actually in a lower mainland. He uses chicory, and he's actually quite happy. He was surprised how deep they actually drill. So
Awesome. Thank you. Specifically, when we had our discussion with that cover crop specialist, we already had our seed in hand. So our discussion was more around timing for seed and what were our objectives with the seed mix that we already had. And, if we had wanted to see more root development with the tillage radish, was there a possibility we could seed it later or prevent it from going to seed? So that the plant's energy was more focused on that root production rather than on seed production. So yeah, there is an opportunity to evaluate more seeds, and thanks for sharing that one because chicory wasn't on my radar. So we'll look at that for this year.
Okay. Other questions? Did you find it easy to, you mentioned that you had seed kind of donated to you and it was easy to find it this year. Do you know where the seed's from? Is it from close by? Is cover crop seed something that's just easy to come by, or is that a challenge?
So we made our own blend. And one of the layers to the requirements for our cover crop mix was that we're undergoing our certification for organic status. So we also had that layer there as well. However, the Peace region is pretty far from everything, but as far as I understand, the seed came from just across the border in Alberta. So relatively close, all things considered. Yeah. But it did have to be certified organic. So sorry, Nadia. So that was, a challenge for us because it limited who we could ask and where we could go for that.
I would say we're pretty fortunate. We got multiple seed dealers. Cover crops are pretty commonly used up here. So it's relatively easy to get that. But yeah, for Michelle, we needed the certified organic as well.
Great. Are there other questions? I can draw a few from the ones that were asked previously. You mentioned getting into haying. That was new for you? Were you purchasing hay to supplement feeding your cattle beforehand?
Yeah, we typically have been. Just in the last 2 years, we've acquired additional hayland that we've been able to lease from some people in the area. So we are haying, more than we ever have, and that takes up a lot of time.
Right.
Yeah.
Rather than purchasing hay, you're leasing a field and growing it yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And
one from Sean.
oh yeah, I was curious about that. What were the two agri-food, there's a question in the chat. What were the two agri-food crops that came off the cover crop? I guess you showed one in a jar. I'm curious about what that was, and then what was it?
So that was like a pickled radish pod that we took from the tillage radish. And then we also produced what we call a cover crop kraut. So we use the daikon radish in with just your traditional sauerkraut, and it's basically like a spicy kraut that we made with it. Yeah. We're really lucky. We have a commercial kitchen on site here at the farm, and so we're able to produce food there for retail purposes.
Okay, great. Julia, you have your hand up.
Michelle, could you maybe talk a little bit about some of the funding opportunities that are available for folks that want to try out some of these BMPs?
Well, I gotta look at the list for that, but yes, the first one that comes to mind is OFCAF is opening again. I think it opens the end of this week. That's the On-Farm Climate Action Fund. I think I've got that right. That's through CFGA, I think. We've accessed that before to help us with our grazing management plans as well. That's been a great program. I'm trying to think what else is currently open. Julia, you asked me a question you know the answer to.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to hear it from you because
Sure.
you've used it, but there's also the environmental farm plan,
Right.
that people can apply for, where there's funding opportunities there. And then since you've kicked it back to me anyway, I might as well just keep going. On the subject of, getting started and mentoring and getting help from people, we'll be running another round of grazing and cover cropping field days and workshops this year all over the province. So if you are a member, you'll get newsletters every month letting you know about it's basically chock full of funding opportunities and upcoming workshops and seminars and field days and all that sort of thing. So it's a good way to connect with other people in your community and mentors and get a bit of like peer mentorship going as well. So there's a list of funding options on our website as well.
Yeah, I guess for those in the Peace, I'm sure Eric knows about it. I can't remember if I saw any other Peace region names, but we have access to the BC Hydro Site C Compensation Fund as a funding opportunity as well up here.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions? Pull some from what was asked beforehand. You do breed your own pigs. I think I had heard that.
We typically do. This year we don't have any breeding stock on the farm, but yes, we do farrow our own hogs normally. Yeah.
And is it what's your supply like for like broilers and turkeys in your area? Is that fairly easy to come by?
So there's, we're really lucky. We're a very rural area. So there's a lot of people who just generally are into raising their own food. So having, a couple pigs and some turkeys and some chickens is pretty common for everyone. For a lot of people, I should say. But in terms of people who are doing it as a business, I would say that there's not too many.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're needing to source those or from an organic source as well?
Yeah, or raise them, or breed them on our own, or or raise them from very young. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from Courtney. She's curious what kind of pigs, pig breeds you have.
Sure. Right now we're trialing Hereford Tamsworth Duroc crosses. We've had some other breeds in the past, but they're always a heritage cross. Yeah.
Great. There's a question in the chat. Does anyone here raise coon pigs, which can utilize forage more efficiently than other breeds, they say?
I don't know anybody who raises coonies. Okay. Julia, do you?
Well, I know lots of people do. But full disclosure, I raise purebred red wattles, so I am red wattle biased. I've heard that kunis can do well on forage. The problem I see is from an economic perspective, it takes just as long and just as much fuel to haul a load of kunis to the butcher, and the yield just isn't as good as was with some of the other heritage breeds. So it would really depend on your situation. Like maybe if you were getting really good forage conversion, that might be a good opportunity. I can't speak to it because I haven't tried, but I would just, make sure that you're keeping an eye on your numbers and keeping track of all of your expenses on your spreadsheet, and making sure that the numbers check out, because it's hard enough on pigs or anything that eats food these days, right?
You mentioned, I think in the video you alluded to the pigs potentially foraging some of the forest grazing. What's your sort of method on that? Like, how careful do you have to be in terms of them overgrazing and overeating within the forest areas?
Sure. I think at this point we've always undergrazed our silvopasture areas. We have a 6-acre permanently perimeter fenced area that we typically run our grower pigs in. And it seems to get better every year. So I don't think we've maxed out our capacity there. When we are setting up our paddocks, we always try to include some silvopasture and some more tame pasture in it, so that we're giving them a lot of, variety there, and all the pressure just isn't in the forest itself. We struggle with predator issues in the forest as well, so we do need to give them that out, I guess. So we have a lot of black bears up here that we struggle with, specifically with the pigs.
Great. Are there any other questions?
Michelle, maybe you could talk a little bit about your guardian dogs.
Sure. Our 3 best employees on the farm, I should say. Yeah, I don't think we could farm up here without them, to be honest. They work 24/7. 2 of them are Turkish Kangles, and the third one is a mix of all guardian breeds: Maremma, Akbash, Pyrenees, and Anatolian. And they are the primary reason that we have reduced our predator loss. Their inherent genetics and ability to protect livestock are impressive. And there was 1 year we lost 11 pigs in one night to a single black bear. So we have not had that level of loss since we brought the guardian dogs into working for us. So they also wear GPS collars. So they are, limited to our quarter section, our 160 acres. And they don't leave there. And we use them to help manage our grazing, especially with our poultry production and the hogs. The beef cattle, they like to spend time with them when we're in calving season, but they tend to not worry about them other than that. The only predator that our guardian dogs are challenged by are birds. They just seem to get in there before the dogs notice that they're there. Or if it's a very windy day, like the fox definitely use that to their advantage, and they try to hunt then, because it's harder for the dogs to hear. But in general, we're not joking when we say our guardian dogs are our 3 best employees.
Plus they work for food. Natalie, you have your hand up?
Hi, Michelle. Yeah.
Hi.
Following up on that, we're just getting started. We're just new entrants, even though we're not young adults anymore. And we understand, the statistics about suicide in farmers, and the rates are quite high. My husband's just looking at me wondering what the
We're
heck.
doing fine.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is as we get started, we want to make sure we're not too isolated. So we're not planning on overwintering animals at this time, because our scale is really going to be quite small. And as a result, we're not planning on having livestock dogs, because without animals, they feel lost. But your husband mentioned on the video that you guys do manage to get away. Winter can be a time to get away. I'm just wondering what pieces are in place for you to be able to do that with dogs, with overwintering animals, that kind of stuff.
Sure. Really willing and helpful neighbors and friends who understand your operation. The bale grazing, being able to, put out 2 weeks worth of food for our cows really helps. It's the same thing with our laying hens and our hogs. The hogs, we do have to feed daily, but the laying hens, they have a week's worth of food in front of them. And water as well. So even though you're going in and checking on your animals multiple times a day, briefly, you aren't spending 2 or 3 hours at a time or a day feeding necessarily. So that really helps lower the workload on anybody we're asking to help us get off the farm.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Eden, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, actually, my question's about more actually during the summer when you're really rotational grazing. Our property, we are also just starting up, and our property doesn't have a lot of water infrastructure in place at this point. We're looking at drinking posts and all sorts of things and trying to put them in key spots, and it's very challenging because our land is not flat by any means. But I guess my question is, what method are you currently using to get water to all of your rotational paddocks? Like, are you toting the water out? Like, I've looked at water tank trailers that I can drag up to certain spots and fill livestock tanks, and I've looked at all sorts of things. So I'm just wondering what your method is, and if there's, like, through trial and error, if you figured out one that's slightly less laborious or works better for you or anything like that.
We use all the techniques, to be honest. So water is our biggest challenge on the farm, access to water for our livestock, for sure. So yes, we do use the tote system. We've got some really large cattle tubs that we use for the cattle. We also have one part of the property where we have a dugout, so we use a solar waterer, like a solar buggy, if you're familiar with those. We use that on one part of the property. We have a lot of flat lay hose that we run off pumps and, temporarily pipeline the property depending on where the cattle are. We use all the techniques. I wish you the best, because water is challenging and it's exhausting, because it is so necessary all the time. Where our laying hens are set up in a way where they're about every 3 days that we need to water them in the heat of the summer, just with the waters that we have there. The cattle are every few days as well. The hogs are every day for sure, because they need to be able to wallow as well. So, yeah.
So
I don't have the answer for you, but I can share what we're doing.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. No problem. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Kristen, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Just on the same subject matter regarding, or I guess you're not moving the cattle as much in the winter, but I'm thinking about like the de-icers and then power in the winter as.
Yeah. So we have them on an automatic water in the winter. You can maybe even hear it kicking on behind me every once in a while here. They're on our house water for the winter.
Okay, and they're nearby, so there's power there.
Yeah. So they've got, a few hundred yards to walk to their bale graze, but we force them to walk back closer in the winter for their water. And we find that we're getting really good maternal outcomes from that as well. Like, we rarely have to assist during calving, because they're always on the move, and we place our bales strategically that way so that our cattle have a good distance to walk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, we're coming up to the end of our time here, but we'll take a couple more questions. We'll wrap up. Eric, you've got your hand up.
I think maybe some comment about water. We set up rotational grazing with BCCAF last spring, and I hauled water all summer. It was great we did it. So we were able to graze maybe less than other baths. But we did build a dugout with BCCAF in early January around Dawson Creek. All of the snow melted, all the water in the dugout. I got a whole foot and a half at the bottom of the dugout. And you put in the stock bottom water, the winter water, it doesn't need any electricity. Right? And the idea is to put that on actually the top part of the border, the highest part of the border, and it's fed across the border line of the base of the next garbage border. It should build it on the road. When it gets overrated, what happens? The other thing is we have no pump, and then solar water installed. So these are some other options. And again, sometimes the hills are in your advantage. That's been listed those west southeast corners of the property and we cover both of them.
I'm not sure if anybody had better ears than me, but Eric, it's a bit hard to hear. I heard dugout, but I think that's mostly what I heard. Did you pick up more than that, Michelle?
I think, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but were you also talking about the frost-free nose pumps?
Yes, there was a nose pump that came with the specs that we added in with BCCAF funding and a water boy. But the big issue, the big comment I made was we have this new dugout supposed to be full for next year, so we don't have to haul water. All the snow melted and there was no water. So we're hoping the next storm will fill the dugout. It's gravity fed.
Right.
Right, we're traveling.
So it was did you hear
I
that?
didn't catch much of that, but it did make me think something I'm hoping to do with my environmental farm plan, because we're in a tough water situation as well, is to be able to get some storage in so we can pump out of our shallow dugouts when we do have water and collect and store that so that we have extra water for the times of year when we don't. And
Yeah,
there's funding available for that.
There is, yeah. It sounds really dramatic, but we make no decisions on the farm right now that don't involve a water perspective. Like, you know, when we're kind of doing a gap analysis of maybe our dreams for the season, whether or not we think water is related, it's always got a heading on our decision making. You know, every building that we build now is going to have eavesdropping on it, you know, all those types of things. So yeah, it's super interesting. It's challenging for sure.
And the ministry's on tour right now talking about water. There's a number of workshops all over the province. So if you have questions about the new Water Sustainability Act or anything water related that the ministry might be able to answer, I encourage you to look for a workshop in your area and check it out. Because yeah, that's a hot issue. Holy smokes.
Yep, I think all of us who farm water is definitely top of mind.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're pretty much at the end of our time. Are there any more burning questions that can be answered in a minute and a half?
I'm just going to drop a link to the SSMPA website in the chat in case anybody wants to check it out.
Great. Yeah. Feel free to share links in the chat.
Yeah, and maybe David, I'll just add to build on what Julia had said earlier, just around some of the extension services that the province is offering. I had the opportunity to participate in the ACARN event last week, and it was great to hear some of the updates that the province was providing relative to some of the extension services that are being made available to farms throughout the province. So, you know, I think there's been lots of excitement and maybe not as much information available actively and regularly, but it sounds like there's lots of information that's forthcoming shortly. And we certainly have really appreciated the opportunity of working with organizations and partnering with organizations like Small Scale Meat Producers Association, and having the opportunity to go to Whiskey Creek and just support all the great knowledge transfer opportunities that there are throughout the province. So, and I think you'll see more of that from our organization, from FarmFolk, from Small Scale, from other organizations throughout the province, just to be able to share some of the great work, like what is being done at Whiskey Creek, and with the Peace Region Forage Association, and all the really innovative approaches. I dropped a few pictures in the chat if we have a chance to take a look at them. But yeah, just some really great leadership happening in the piece. And so congrats, ladies. You guys are awesome.
Thanks, Cheryl.
And big thank you to FarmFolk CityFolk for doing all the heavy lifting on this event tonight, and the beautiful film that turned out really nicely. And you guys are great to work with.
Thanks, but I'd say you farmers are doing the heavy lifting. But thanks for the compliment. We will be following up this event with an email that includes links to resources discussed today and cover cropping related grants if there's anything we didn't mention here already, and a survey to get your feedback on the event, which is always super important for us. It really helps us deliver events that people and farmers are interested in, rather than us just guessing what is interesting.
Well, and I'm just going to say, I'm just going to really say, please do fill out that survey, because there's a little more to it than David's even saying. Our funders want to see that you guys enjoyed this, that you got something out of it. And so it really helps us when people do fill out these surveys. I know that you get asked to do a lot of surveys, but if you want to be able to come to events like this for free, we need to keep getting funding. So please fill out your surveys.
Yeah, if you just a little hint, if anybody wants to save the chat, any of the links in the chat, at the bottom of the chat where you'd type something, there's 3 little dots. If you click on that, you can click Save Chat, and it will save it to your computer before the meeting ends.
All of those links will also be included in a follow-up email along with the recording of this event as well.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, I think just a big thank you to Michelle and Nadia and Julia for joining us tonight, and this event, and for sharing your knowledge. And thanks for everybody else who joined, because it wouldn't be the same without people to engage with things. So yeah, having farmers come together all together like this it's just so great. So have a great night, everybody.
Thanks
Thanks,
all.
everyone.